There are few characters from the Ryu Ga Gotoku franchise who aren't prime candidates for a dedicated ballad. The series is ripe with supporting roles who've been fleshed out into memorable pillars, keeping every entry upright with stories of their own. Daigo Dojima's encapsulates privilege. Shun Akiyama's revolves around the momentum of financial power. But somewhere in the middle of this very tiny spectrum I've just arbitrarily constructed inside your mind is Kiryu's closest ally and Ryu Ga Gotoku's forgotten keystone, one whose growth is determined by the role he's needed to fill by the narrative and somehow still has a clear through line. A hero's journey in a series not really known for using said literary mechanism. It speaks on authoritative power, how it's designed to maintain appearances and uphold a status quo in a system meant to keep people under the thumb of a ruling class. How removal of said oppression is only possible from the outside of such an organization. And it kind of botches the job towards the end. It's messy. Messy enough to warrant a conversation. Messy enough to make it a fascinating character study. I'm GC, and this is the Ballad of Makoto Date. We're first introduced to Dante in a scene where he's interrogating Kiryu for the murder of a captain in the Tojo Yakuza clan. The audience knows Kiryu's innocence despite his confession, and so does Dante. His insistence on squeezing the truth out of Kiryu is quickly shut down by his superiors. In the 10 years Kiryu's imprisoned, Dante refuses to lay the situation to rest and earns himself a transfer from homicide to the organized crime unit, in this case a demotion, for poking around in business he shouldn't have been. Or so his superiors say. This isn't the beginning of Dante's disillusionment with the police force. 4 years prior, he watches a detective he looked up to murder 4 undocumented immigrants with prejudice. It's a pivotal step in Dante's journey, one which instills in him a fear of using his firearm, even if it's to protect someone he cares about, and plants a seed of doubt in his mind about what exactly the police are meant to be. During the events of the first Yakuza, he further strays away from the force on his search for justice by assisting Kiryu in his search for a loved one. He becomes involved in a convoluted plot involving the largest Yakuza family in Kamurocho, and once the police detain Kiryu on false kidnapping charges, he finally gives up any hope the force is trying to do what's right. Dante lets Kiryu out of his cell, essentially forfeiting his entire career in the process. See, Makoto Date is a bad cop, which makes him a good cop, which makes him a bad cop. One of Ryu Ga Gotoku's greatest strengths as a piece of media is the way it portrays the Japanese justice system, one not entirely like what we're familiar with in the West, but still incredibly similar enough to feel the same way about it. The system is cruel and unfair to select groups, and oftentimes the police force is more concerned with closing cases as fast as possible instead of conducting proper investigations. This leads to the incarceration of innocent people, where trials are often shams. In many cases, any individual suspected of a crime is usually considered guilty until proven innocent, despite what's written on paper. Dante is what I suppose you could call a true believer. Someone in the justice system who genuinely believes in the values it superficially upholds. Dante is a man of justice first and a police officer second. At the end of the first Yakuza, he realizes justice can't be found behind the badge. Releasing Kiryu from custody is Dante's first act of fighting against an institution he helped uphold, and it forever marks him as an enemy of the police. By the end of the first Yakuza, Makoto Date retires, disillusioned, disappointed, and resolute in his decision. The toxic fraternity of the police, however, makes it difficult to completely separate yourself from it, and leaving the force is like trying to leave the mafia. If you manage to, you're not coming away from it without consequences. It's easy to fall back into working for them, and you're an easy scapegoat for cops to shift bad press onto. Yakuza 2 sees a retired Dante recruited by the police for a secret mission. When incomplete footage falsely implicates him as a murderer, the police force wastes no time in putting out a search to bring Dante behind bars. Now, on the opposite side of the law, Dante falls victim to the same misgivings of justice he had previously been trying to prevent, and instead of shrinking under the threats against him, perseveres through it to clear his own name and assist Kiryu in stopping Yakuza 2's central threat. At this point, Dante further separates himself from his previous career, dividing the ideas of justice and authoritative power into two separate things, realizing the former can exist without the latter. Dante's falling out with the police also coincides with his growing aversion to using a gun. He begins to see the gun as a symbol of destruction and the main tool in the police force's arsenal, a tool that silences truth and prevents real justice, an extension of abusive power. We don't see much of Dante in Yakuza 2 or any of the subsequent Yakuzas from here on out, but his obsession with getting to the bottom of every suspicious or shady dealing proves to be intrinsic to who he is as a person. He's Ryu Ga Gotoku's Sailor Moon, and quickly turns his efforts towards toppling the powers perpetrating the greatest injustices. In Yakuza 3 and 4, Makoto Date is every cop's worst enemy, a journalist. Specifically, a journalist concerned with political motions by the Diet and the movements of the police. In Yakuza 4, he ousts the corruption within the Tokyo Police Department by dumping flyers of his article all over Kamurocho. It's honestly a pretty badass scene. His efforts largely go to waste when the police chief he's outed kills himself to avoid persecution. This largely means most of the allegations go unresolved. Dante ends up being reinstated into the force, this time as a member of internal investigations. This bittersweet conclusion to his fight against the police institution is neither helpful nor conclusive. Dante's once again been pulled back into the force, and his search for true justice continues under the watchful eye of a department who's wrapped their leash around his neck again. There's a decent parallel between Dante and Kiryu at this point in the series, and it's worth noting what makes their team up a lot of fun. Both have left their respective organizations, both have been targeted by said organizations, and both have fought against their organizations whenever either stepped in the way of solving their whodunits. The parallel also serves as a great way of establishing how similar the police are to the Yakuza, one Yakuza 4 aggressively runs with. Kiryu and Dante are alike in the way they carry their baggage. Both harbor their own regrets and guilt, memories and failures to protect people in their pasts. Both find themselves returning to the same organizations they've left in order to resolve whatever remorseful memory the people from those organizations are using to pull them back in. It's a good emotional motive. The characters constantly return to a past they want to find closure for. Works pretty well for long-running video game series you didn't expect to be born from an experimental title. The difference is, while Kiryu's struggles are resolved as a result of the main scenario revolving around him, Dante's are often left up in the air or explored through optional sub-stories, and they don't always end favorably for him. Saving his love interest from the killer who murdered her past lover in Yakuza 3 doesn't end in earning her affection. What it does is reinforce his cop ideologies, force him to use a gun, and make her further uncomfortable around police, ex-police, and him. Reconciling with his daughter is an awkward mess of bulldozing his way around Kamurocho on a suicide mission. You could say Dante's painted as somewhat incompetent, and there's plenty of evidence in the series to support it. but I think there's a reason for it. Well, two actually. The first is Date, for all intents and purposes, is a cop, and his incompetence is a statement about the police force in general. The way the force turns on and manipulates him is a deconstruction of the good cop theory. The second is Date lacks closure we find in other characters, including other supporting characters on this show. Yet he maintains an overall, almost naive disposition. He's continuously surprised by story developments and continues to trust people unflinchingly, even with a personal history full of betrayals and being led on. Dante isn't just a man of conviction and justice. At his core, Dante is a man fueled by kindness. A kindness warped by his time as a police officer and his own internal concept of justice, sure, but in the face of adversity, Dante refuses to live in dismay. He's constantly pushing himself towards a happier ending, but he never really gets one. In both endings to the Kiryu saga, the much cleaner, thought-provoking ending of Yakuza 5 and the other entry, which I've decided would be better off forgotten as though it never existed, Date gets the short end of the stick. Even shorter in Yakuza 6. Oh, god damn it, I've gone and remembered it. In Yakuza 5, Dante's absent from most of the narrative. He only returns at the end as a slightly relevant cameo in order to have all the people important to Kiryu congregate underneath New Serena's roof right before the final battle. For what feels like the real final tale in Kiryu's life, it's cute to have Date present and participating in the last group meeting of the series, but it doesn't give him much to do other than offer moral support. Though I suppose Yakuza 4's ending brought about a sort of tumultuous conclusion for Date, not necessarily a happy one, but a thriving and equally hopeful one matching the character himself. Then came along Yakuza 6, technically the last Kiryu Yakuza story. And in the process of ruining closure for Kazuma Kiryu, it naturally has to ruin it for Makoto Date. These two are linked by their pasts, their struggles, and their flaws as people. Yakuza 6 reinforces this connection by permanently intertwining the two together, and does so in a way which makes Kiryu somewhat of a villain. In a narrative about powerful secrets and how they can be used to force people into corners or endanger the lives of many for the sake of withholding the truth, you'd think Dante would have a huge role to play in what would be his last outing. Instead, he's once again placed in the background. Date does little besides move the plot forward with exposition, until the end where, after fighting to unearth a dark secret surrounding Hiroshima, implicating government officials, members of the Yakuza, corporate executives, and the police, Kiryu forces Date into an antithetical position. In keeping the secret of Hiroshima hidden from the world, Kiryu also forces Date to stay silent as well. As Kiryu walks away from the life he's lived, effectively making it very easy to keep his end of the deal, Date has no choice but to remain in his, all the while lying to Kiryu's loved ones in the process. In a surprising moment of selfishness, Kiryu strips Date of his ability to seek out justice. Our detective can't pursue the leads to oust the corruption he's naturally compelled to uncover. And so, Makoto Date ends his story chained tightly in his station. The police keeping him under their gaze, the government wrapping him into a conspiracy he played little to no part in, and Kiryu forcing him to idle in place while keeping the truth away from everyone else. No justice, no truth. The end of Date's story is a complete inversion of its beginnings, from truth seeker to secret keeper. All for the sake of a man who's been the catalyst of his rise and fall from the start. It begs the questions. Did Dante ever truly rebel against the institutions of power in the first place? Or has he been manipulated from the beginning? Did his challenge of the police system ever make a real difference? Or did his proximity to it render it a pointless fight? Was helping Kiryu true justice, or did it play into the hands of greater power? Was Date ever really in control of his own story? These, to me, are the questions I have about Makoto Date's life, and I think it's safe to say they're questions we're meant to have. Ryu Ga Gotoku wants its players to answer those questions for themselves, and in my case, the answers are complicated as a result of the often skewed balance of progressive and conservative values Ryu Ga Gotoku famously and clumsily maintains. If Dante and Kiryu share many similarities, it's worth pointing out their greatest difference. Kiryu makes great efforts to push further and further away from his ties to the Tojo clan, but Dante hovers around the police department, unable to sever himself to the same lengths. I think Date is a commentary on the police and how truly impossible it is for someone to fight for change in such an ingrained institution while remaining so close to it. The Ballad of Makoto Date isn't just about taking power away from a screwed up justice system, nor is it only about a schlubby detective who's kind of a space cadet in order to make the cops look bad. It's about lacking control over your own life, when your ideals clash with those you answer to, having to navigate your relationship with the power structures to whom you're indentured. The illusion of having power over the system because it's using you as a conduit to assert itself over others, and the falsehood of changing it from the inside. Realizing as long as you commit yourself to acting in their name, the only endeavor you can succeed in is platforming them further. There is no happy ending for Makoto Date, and there shouldn't be given his decisions across the series, given what he continues to believe in, and yet, I still wish he had one. From another perspective, the character is the voice of reason most of the time, including when he's being loud or abrasive about it. He never loses hope that one day he'll get what he wants. Even though outcomes rarely go his way, he's looking forward to the next chance he'll get to try again. It's this unwavering attitude which spurs our original hero forward in the first place. In a weird way, you want Date to be happy because if he was, it would mean he enacted some great positive change in the world around him. But you also wonder if a guy like that would ever be satisfied with a single victory and start to think he likes it there, in the trenches. Never claiming glory, never afraid to spit in the face of his superiors, getting thrown around into the worst situations and making a difference in them. Which sort of leads us back to the cop stuff and whether or not the way he chooses to make a difference ultimately ever matters. And I genuinely think this roundabout thought process is part of the character's purpose. In the same way, a good friend winds up being part of a bad group and having to decide whether you're okay with it or not. You sort of pity Date for it. He's a scapegoat for the machinations of other people. But you also don't pity him too much because in a lot of ways he brings it upon himself. I'm sure you've felt that way about someone you know before. There's an air of melancholy surrounding them, a struggle you can easily identify, but not necessarily one you can help them with. The sort of thing they need to pull themselves away from and really never do. Never enough to be a tragedy, never something to leave unaccounted for, but always in the same place you saw them last. Stuck, caught in a cycle they insist they can fix while spinning in it. The next time you play through the Yakuza series, pay closer attention to the detective in the background. Take note of what he says and what he does and what happens to him, and watch as he's stripped of everything but his tenacity. Then ask yourself if it was worth losing everything else for.